Was bedeutet es für die Demokratie, wenn Millionen US-Dollar von privaten Spendern ihren Weg in den Wahlkampf finden?
What does it mean for democracy when millions of dollars from private donors find their way into politics, as it was during the U.S. elections?
You know, money is always a challenge in running elections in a democratic system. The problem is that you have to have money to run, and so you know, obviously the big donors have a lot of influence. Now you have donors like George Soros, who are viewed by many people as very sinister individuals. He gets involved in political things all around the world, and often in ways that are not helpful. But you do have big donors, sometimes on the Republican side. The great majority of your multi-billionaires tend to be Democrats, tend to be very liberal, tend to have a globalist view where they have very little regard for cultural morality, and sometimes they don't care a whole lot about financial responsibility. They usually have something they want and they're out to get it, and they really don't care what the impact is on the country. So that is a problem. It's always a challenge, and I think it's one that we'll be stuck with one way or the other. It's very difficult. No one has really figured out a way that you can run campaigns successfully without money, and it's sort of just one of the facts of life, I'm afraid.
Was denken Sie über ein mögliches Comeback von Donald Trump?
What do you think about a possible comeback of Donald Trump?
You know, Donald Trump has a very powerful following in the country. His strength, his political power was adversely affected by the outcome of the elections last night. We had expected to have a very powerful Republican wave. It turned out to be much thinner than we had hoped, much thinner than Donald Trump had hoped. Many of the candidates were supported by Trump, and it certainly was a big benefit, big advantage to them during the primaries to have his endorsement. But when it came to the general election, because he was so visible throughout the campaign, people began to associate the candidate with Donald Trump. And there are a certain number of people who really dislike Donald Trump. I've been a supporter of his. I voted for him twice, and I used to, before his first election, I was one of the major speakers that would introduce him to these huge crowds of people. In fact, I gave the last speech for him before the election returns started coming in. And they called me at the last minute. They said, "Oh, he's gonna stop in at Leesburg." We had over 25,000 people show up on short notice, just within an hour. And they called me. They said, "Well, would you give a speech for him?" And yeah, okay, I'll do it. So I ran off. I didn't have a note card with anything written or anything. Just gave the speech. So he has a tremendous following, but because he was so visible, I think some people who would have ignored the fact that he had just endorsed somebody, because he was always in the background, I think it sort of became a referendum on him, and that hurt some of the Republican candidates. Now, additionally, he began to tease that he was about to make a presidential announcement. And now at the time, we all thought that Republicans were going to win. The Democrats thought Republicans were going to have a huge victory. And so it's easy to criticize after the fact, but in retrospect, it would have been better if he hadn't started talking about a presidential campaign. He didn't announce, but he was hinting, and everybody would watch his next appearance, and they weren't focused on the candidates. They were focused on, is Trump going to say something now? Is he going to make an announcement? So in retrospect, that didn't help any. Now, so I would say that the midterms have not been good for Trump, but at the same time, they've been a tremendous boost to Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida. DeSantis is clearly the most successful governor in the country, and he had a tremendous victory. And his victory seemed to reach out everywhere. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Miami-Dade County. Well, over the years, with the floods of people coming in from Cuba, it's now Spanish speaking. There are places where English is not even spoken there. And DeSantis was able to actually win that major metropolitan area. It's a very huge area. And so that really was a shock to the Democrats, to the Republicans even. And it just shows he's a very bright, very energetic, youthful person. And so I think this makes him a much more potent opponent for Trump. They're both seeking the same type of voters, and so we'll see what happens. But I think these elections will have a very large impact on who becomes the Republican nominee for president in 2024.
Warum unterstützen Sie nicht die offizielle Linie Washingtons beim Ukraine-Konflikt?
Why do you not support Washington's official line on the Ukraine conflict?
When Russia entered the war on February 24th, there was a massive wave of propaganda from all the mainstream media globally. It happened in Germany, it happened in the US, it happened in Great Britain, everywhere. Russia's terrible. Russia's starting this war. What they didn't say is that in 2014, the Central Intelligence Agency, the US Intelligence Agency, and the British Intelligence Agency, MI6, worked together with various underground groups in Ukraine, and they overthrew the duly elected government of President Yushchenko and Yanukovych. I have difficulty pronouncing his name, but anyway, he was overthrown, and the Central Intelligence Agency and the U.S. State Department literally hand-selected some of the ministers of the new government. So you had a government that took power, and it was a revolutionary junta. It wasn't an elected government. It was a group of people who had been throwing Molotov cocktails and gunning down police and soldiers just before. Very brutal revolution, where in the port city of Odessa, they cornered about 40 protesters. They cornered them, and the protesters ran into a building to escape from the right-wing Ukrainians. And then they lit fire to the building and they burned them all alive. One of them managed to jump from a second-story window. He broke his leg, and while he was laying there, the Ukrainians set on him, beat him to death. And so this was a very cruel and very violent revolution that was inspired by the United States CIA and by British MI6. Well, one of the first things the new revolutionary junta did is they changed the constitution. The constitution of Ukraine had said that Ukrainian was the first language, Russian was the second language. Now, why? The reason is because about 30% of all Ukrainians are native-speaking Russians. The line that formed Ukraine was rather arbitrarily drawn, and it managed to bring a lot of people who normally should have been Russians, and it made them Ukrainians. Well, when they took away the Russian language from the Constitution, then they began to fire Russian-speaking school teachers because you had teachers who taught all their life in Russian, and many of these were in the Donbass and in Crimea. Now, Crimea was always part of Russia. It was just sort of a historical anomaly that it was temporarily outside. But it had been Russian for 500 years. And so it was almost 100% Russian. And in the Donbass, the two republics that make up the Donbass, that was almost all Russian-speaking people. And so when this revolutionary junta that was installed by the West took over, they said, oh, we're fine when we can participate and we can help to elect the government. But if you're just going to overthrow the government we elected, we're not going to be part of it. So we're going to declare independence. So they did. The Crimea declared independence, and the two Donbass republics declared their independence. And what happened then is, and this, I'm sure this had all been planned in advance. When we didn't overthrow the government and just say, well, let's see what happens. We had a plan. And the plan was then we would arm the Ukrainians. We would create a great army, and the army purpose would be to go against Russia. And so we began flooding arms into Ukraine. The army built up, and then the new president, Poroshenko, he ordered the army to go and to attack the two republics of the Donbass. This war really started in 2014. Russia did not want this war. When the war started, February the 24th, for Russia, when Russia got involved in it, the sides fought. They fought some very sharp engagements, but there had not been a lot of property damage or a great number of casualties. 2 months later, Russia and Ukraine sat down and they hammered out a peace agreement, and they would have had peace after 2 months, except that Great Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson flew unexpectedly to Kiev and ordered Ukraine to stop talking peace and get back to the business of war. We provided you a lot of money, a lot of weapons, and now we expect war. And it was a rotten, despicable thing to do. I don't think Boris Johnson would have dared to do that unless he had the permission of the White House. So I don't see this as a war that is Russia's fault at all. They did everything they could to avert a war, and the United States and NATO, United Kingdom, they pushed this, they created the war. And so those are some of many reasons that I am adamantly opposed to our involvement in the war.
Was sind die Ziele Washingtons in diesem Krieg?
What are Washington's goals in this war?
The people who really run the foreign policy of nations are not the citizens of Germany. They're not the citizens of America. They're these globalists. I call them the boys from Davos. They're these mega billionaires who fly together to places like Davos, Switzerland, and they get their orders. Kings and princes and heads of churches and celebrities and they all come together and they get their orders. Here's what you'll do. And now it's not quite that simple. But I'm saying when I say they get their orders, someone sets the agenda, because you can't gather a couple thousand people for one of these conferences and make any sense out of it. Somebody has to say, we're going to talk about this, this, this. Well, they're able to guide the policy of nations, the financial policies. If they want to flood the world with unbacked currency, they do it. If they want to shut down the whole world for COVID, make everybody put a mask on and shut the churches and so forth, they do it because they coordinate. It's a very powerful thing. When you talk about this one world order or new world order that's been talked about by presidents in this country, it's a very real thing. It's not some futuristic idea. And so what these people do, war is one of the most profitable enterprises known to man, not for ordinary people like us, but these mega billionaires. They orchestrate these wars. There are dynasty families who are very famous, and you can't safely mention their names, but they're out there. What they like to do is they like to go in and break up countries. And when they do, those countries, the nation actually owns things. You look at Ukraine. Ukraine has a great deal of natural wealth. They have lands that produce wheat. They have natural gas. They have a lot of resources. They have recently enacted legislation through the Ukrainian legislature that will sell off the government-owned properties. Now, nobody in Ukraine, the citizens don't have any money. They're having trouble just, feeding themselves, heating the house. But there are oligarchs. Some are Ukrainian oligarchs, but a lot of them are not. A lot of them are these mega billionaires, and they come in and they buy up these properties for a nickel on the dollar. And they profit fantastically when they do this. Now, Ukraine that was a very lucrative thing for them to target, to privatize everything. When you get to Russia, if they are able to overthrow the government and to install some sort of a NATO puppet, the wealth of Russia is just beyond belief. And I heard one well-known 4-star general, a retired general who's always trotted out to speak on Fox News, and he said contemptuously about Russia. He says it's a one commodity country. There's nothing to Russia. It's a one commodity country. I have difficulty believing that this general is that ignorant. But I think the people in Germany understand that it is not a one commodity country. Obviously, it's the biggest exporter of natural gas, but it's also the world's biggest exporter of lumber. It's the world's biggest exporter of wheat. It's the world's biggest exporter of fertilizer. And then it's one of the biggest three exporters of oil, aluminum, titanium, gold. It goes on and on. 44% of the diesel fuel that runs your trucks in Germany, your construction equipment, 44% of that diesel fuel has traditionally come from Russia. So there's every reason in the world that Germany and Russia should be the closest of allies and trading partners. But I think it's time that Germany looks and says, okay, the Soviet Union is gone. And the idea that Russia is the Soviet Union is an illusion promoted by NATO to justify their existence. And unfortunately, NATO is the United States. We're sort of in the background. We're sort of like the puppeteers, but the Supreme Allied Commander, Europe, is always and always has been an American, and which made a lot of sense during the Cold War. And NATO is full of American people who helped orchestrate it, and a lot of the funding is American. So we really are dominant over NATO, and I wish we were not. Donald Trump, one of the things he ran on when he campaigned is he said, we're going to downgrade our involvement in NATO, because he knew that NATO promotes warfare and conflict, and he wanted us out. He was never able to do it because all of the deep state rose up in secret and undermined him, and so he wasn't able to do it. But I worry, in a nutshell, what I'm saying, the reason that we're involved is to grasp the natural resources of Russia, put them under dominance or sometimes actual ownership by Western oligarchs. I think that's where we're headed.
Wie schätzen Sie die derzeitige Regierung in Deutschland und ihre Politik des Verzichts auf günstige Energie aus Russland ein?
What do you think of the current government in Germany and its policy of abandoning cheap Russian energy?
I think it was a tremendous blunder or misjudgment to give up Russian energy. Russian natural gas is the lifeblood of Germany. It's almost like if you cut the artery to your heart. That is the importance of the Russian gas to Germany. The entire chemical industry, which is a vast industry, is cut off. So I think it's a tremendous error. I think that when the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines were destroyed, I think that was done with U.S. permission. Apparently, the UK carried it out. There was communication from then Prime Minister Liz Truss, where she, 1 minute after the detonations occurred, she sent a message back to our Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, and she said, it's done. What she meant is we have now destroyed the pipelines. I think the Chancellor understands who did it. I don't think it's a mystery, but I think he is afraid that if he pushes back too hard, bad things will happen to Germany. I wish there were greater independence by Germany. I dislike the fact that they station nuclear weapons in their borders. The only thing that does is it makes Germany a nuclear target in a war that they don't want. And so I think there have been terrible fundamental mistakes made. I think the energy policy of Germany is disastrous. And I'm most impressed by the AFD party, to be quite honest. They're young, they're bright, they're very, very balanced, but they have a great understanding of what's going on. So, not to get involved in German politics, but I think there are people who have the dedication to the American people or to the German people that would better represent your interests.